Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this video, we're going to be exploring the question of when a person's lineage is affirmed. How does that operate when it comes to the question of whether you can marry that person or not? So, a lot of students, when they see these set of questions that are going to appear in this video, they think it's just about slavery, because you'll hear things like ummi walad, you'll hear about slave girls, hubla min zina, a woman who's pregnant from zina, all these things, and they get confused and they think, what has this got to do with hurma? The idea here is that we're trying to establish as jurists the parameters of what's called thabitun nasab. This idea here, it appears quite a lot. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish the exact parameters, because the idea is that when a nasab is affirmed, the lineage is affirmed, then the nikah is invalid. So the fuqaha are trying to do this. So just keep this in mind as we're going through this video, that's what we're working upon. So let's begin, inshallah ta'ala, the first mas'ala. So Imam Marghinani says, فَإِن تَزَوَّجَ حُبْلَ مِنَ الزِّنَا. If he marries a hubla min zina, hubla is a woman who is pregnant out of zina, but we don't know who her father is. That's important, because they'll separate that out. In the next masala, they show when we know what the father is. So, وَإِن تَزَوَّجَ حُبْلَ مِنَ الزِّنَا جَازَ النِّكَاحِ. If a person wants to marry a woman who's pregnant out of zina, and we don't know who the father is, then nikah is permitted. However, the fuqaha say, وَلَا يَطَأُهَا حَتَّى تَضَعَ حَمْلَهَا. But you're not to have intercourse with her until she gives birth. وَهَذَا عِنْدَ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ وَمُحَمَّدٍ. This is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad. So I've just listed it here. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad. Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. And he says, وَقَالَ Abu Yusuf رحمه الله تعالى. Imam Abu Yusuf says, النِّكَاحُ فَاسِدٌ. That the nikah is fasid. Now, in nikah, when they use fasid and batil, they effectively mean the same thing. In buyu, we do have fasid and batil, void contracts or deficient contracts. But here it's used, according to most ulama, interchangeably. And this mas'ala and this set of mas'alas that we're going to discuss today are from the khawas of Jami' al-Saghir. Again, the Jami' al-Saghir, very important text, and I hope one day, inshallah, we will study it. But the Jami' al-Saghir is a text which has puzzles, and the student is expected to grapple with the puzzles, the cases in there, to get a deeper insight into the theory of how fiqh works. And we'll see that today in this video, insha'Allah ta'ala. So, just to re-summarize again, when a person is pregnant out of zina, we don't know who the father is. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad allow it. Here, Imam Abu Yusuf does not allow it. And the Sheikh then explains why. But before he actually goes into that, what he does is he brings the second masala, because they're both interrelated. So I put the first one as A, and the B is the second one, which is related. فَإِنْ كَانَ الْحَمْلُ ثَابِتَ النَّسَبِ. So in this one, we actually know who the nasab is. We actually know the nasab of the child. So this is what he's saying. وَإِنْ كَانَ الْحَمْلُ ثَابِتَ النَّسَبِ. So we know who the father is. فَالنِّكَاحُ بَاطِلٌ بِالْإِجْمَاعِ. The nikah is batil according to all ulama. So just to separate again, a woman who is pregnant out of zina, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad allow it, but you have to wait until she's given birth. Imam Abu Yusuf doesn't allow it. A woman who is pregnant and we know who the father is, so we actually know who the nasab is, then according to all three imams, the nikah is batil according to all ulama. Now, what's the reason for Imam Abu Yusuf in both cases? Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, أن الامتناع في الأصل لحرمة الحمل. That the thing that prevents in both case A and case B is what I would call here the sanctity of the womb, وَهَذَا الْحَمْلُ مُحْتَرَمٌ, that this womb is muhtaram, لأنه لا جناية منه. The womb itself hasn't committed any crime. It's innocent, if you like. That's what he's saying here. And then he gives, he looks at another case, and you'll see this in fiqh a lot. What they do is they bring in other cases to supplement the point that they're making. So he says, وَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَجُزْ إِسْقَاطُهُ. That's why, according to what presented here, you are not to engage in abortion. I mean, there's a debate about up to what extent this is allowed, but he's just saying that the reason you're not allowed to do an abortion is that there is this ihtiram of the womb, and so we don't allow it in that case. And if we work backwards, it's the same case here. There's a sanctity of the womb. So even if the child, if you're pregnant out of zina, and you don't know the father, or you do know the father, in both cases, Imam Abu Yusuf is being consistent, and he's saying it's not allowed to marry that woman. That's the position of Imam Abu Yusuf, rahimahullah ta'ala. Because the mahal of nikah for Abu Yusuf, which is the woman, of course, she's masghulatun bil walad. She's engaged with this child. She has this child in her. فلا يحتمل شغل آخر, and she can't take on another shughul, another burden, if you like. فيسد نكاح الحبلى من الزنا. So the nikah of the woman who is pregnant with zina, we don't know the father. Just like the hamal, when she's pregnant, when you know who the father, in both cases, it's not allowed according to Imam Abu Yusuf. And he explains in detail in other books. They say things like أن المقصود من النكاح, that the whole point of nikah is to have a child, right? So nikah is obviously you have intercourse, and the intercourse leads to a child, right? This is a cause and effect. وهو الحكمة في الشرع النكاح. This is the wisdom in the sharia of nikah. The nikah, the wisdom of the nikah is to achieve this goal at the end. وَالْحَمْلُ مُنَافٍ لِهَذَا الْمَنَى. But when you're pregnant, when a woman is pregnant, it doesn't allow this outcome to be achieved. It's very rational, because you're already pregnant, you can't have a child at that moment in time. فَلَا يَصِحُ نِكَاحُ الْحُبْلَى. So therefore you can't marry the first one, case A woman who's pregnant out of zina, and you don't know the father. وَلِأَنَّ امْتِنَاحَ نِكَاحِ الْحُبْلَى إِذَا كَانَ الْحَمْلُ ثَابِتَ النَّسَبِ. And even in the case of B, you can't, because the hurma of the haml, of the womb. وَالْحَمْلُ مِنَ الزِّنَا مُحْتَرَمٌ. For him, the womb is still, because there's a sanctity of the womb, the child is innocent. لأنه محل أمانة الله تعالى. It's a trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The child is innocent, it's not done anything wrong. ولا جناية منه. There's nothing wrong, the child hasn't done anything wrong. فيحرم نكاح الحبلى من الزنا لحرمة والصيانة ألا ترى أنه لا يجوز إسقاطه. So he's using another case, like I mentioned, that you can't abort the birth, you can't abort a child, you can't engage in abortion, and the reason is that there's a hurma of the womb, and that same reasoning is being applied here to prevent in both cases A and B, to prevent the man who wants to marry the hubla, or the woman who has hamal, whose nasab is known. We know who the nasab is. So that's enough to do with Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala. And I just want to return to our two teachers here, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, walahuma. So they need to respond to both Imam Abu Yusuf's position. Walahuma, according to them, anna ha, this woman, min al muhallat bin nas, that this woman, in case A, because they all agree in case B that you can't marry her. In case A, that she's allowed, the Quran has allowed it, and there's no reason for you to prevent this from happening. Allah says in the Quran, وَأُحِلَّ لَكُم مَّا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ, in Surah An-Nisa, verse number 24. So it's jaiz nikahuha, to marry her, غير أنه لا يطؤها حتى تضع حملها بالحديث. But there's a hadith that says that you are not to have intercourse with her. She's still pregnant, of course. In the hubla case, the woman who's pregnant out of zina, we don't know the father, because it's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, fala yasqiyanna ma'ahu zar'a ghayrihi." Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, he should not place his water in the field of somebody else. In other words, keep it separate. And this makes complete sense. ولا يزيد من حرمة الوطي بعارض محتمل للزوال فساد النكاح. So he talks about, there's another qiyas that they use that to raise against Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, that you can't say that nikah is fasid just because somebody can't give birth, right? This is one of the things that Imam Abu Yusuf was alluding to, because they use, again, the Imam Abu Hanifa and Muhammad say, well, look at an example of someone who's from the nufasa, a woman who's experiencing menstruation. When a woman experiences menstruation, she can't give birth, right? She's not a mahal of kind of womb, but that doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean you can't marry her or something. ألا ترى أن النفساء لا يحل وطأها بسبب النفاس, that you can't have intercourse with her because she's menstruating. ولا يلزم منه فساد nikah, and therefore it doesn't mean that nikah is fasid. Just because you can't have wati with someone, just because you can't have intercourse with someone, does not necessarily mean. Just because you can't have intercourse with someone doesn't necessarily mean that you can't marry them. If you work backwards, if you think about it backwards, the logic backwards, because they use another case of menstruation to show, well, clearly when a woman, your wife, is experiencing menstruation, you can't have intercourse with her. That does not lead to the nikah being broken. I hope that makes sense. It's very rational, very, very simple. But the idea here is that we have the Quran, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, which says mutlaqan that you're allowed to marry beyond the ones that have been made haram for you, as we mentioned in the previous videos. فإن قلت, you might say, كيف لم ندخل الحامل وإذا كان حمل ثابت النسب. Now, if you're saying that the nasab is thabit, and why can't you just have intercourse with her? Because Allah says, وَأُحِلَّ لَكُم مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ. Well, in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَعْزِمُوا عُقْدَةَ النِّكَاحِ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ الْكِتَابُ أَجَلَ. This is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 235. And this means انقضاء العدة ولا تعتد الحبلى من الزنا. So you have to wait till she's given birth. So this is how it's understood. Because someone might say, well, okay, you said that they're allowed. Why are you making a restriction to say that she has to wait till she's given birth? We say, well, there's a verse in the Quran that gives us that meaning. Okay, so that's just really making everything really tight and clear for you. Then, as for Imam Abu Yusuf's claim that أن الامتناع في الأسر لحرمة الحمل. Remember, Imam Abu Yusuf says that one of the reasons that prevents in both case A and B is that there's this sanctity of the womb. And he does a qiyas. Imam Abu Yusuf is basically doing a form of qiyas here, if you like, to kind of come to his conclusion. Let me see if I can drop this out. My rubber's not big enough, so let me just do it here, inshallah ta'ala, for you. So, Abu Yusuf, what he does is he does a qiyas on the hubla min az-zina. So, if you think about the example before, the hubla min az-zina, the woman who's pregnant from zina, and we don't know the father. So, Anna Abu Yusuf qasa nikah al-hubla min az-zina ala nikah al-hubla idha kana hamid nasab. So, what he's doing, he's saying, well, look at the example when it's thabitun nasab. So, think about this. Okay, so we all agree that this one is not allowed. Everybody agrees with that. Okay, إذا كان حملها ثابت النسب. We know that the woman is pregnant, and we know that she has a father. We all agree that no one is to marry that woman because she has a nasab. Okay, فقال ثمة لا يجوز فكذا هنا. So just like it's not allowed in here, it's not allowed in this case. Okay, because there's something which is common in both of them. لوجود الجامع وهو حرمة الحمل. Like they both have the same meaning. They both carry this idea of the sanctity of the womb. So because they both carry the same ta'leel, the same meaning, they're both not. You're not allowed to marry both of them. Okay, that's the position, like I mentioned, of Imam Abu Hanifa. I hope that makes sense. There's qiyas going on. There's a lot going on here, but it's a wonderful this is actually a wonderful series of cases to explore with your students, because they get a deep understanding of fiqh, and because this is like bringing many facets of fiqh, usul al-fiqh, furu' al-fiqh, different aspects of fiqh, students get really deep understanding of how fiqh works. We're not even finished with this masala because we can learn so much. And so this is Imam Abu Yusuf's position. And then as for why we mentioned about why you can't you can't marry the woman in the first case until she has given birth, because they mentioned it's a reasonable reason, كي لا يسقي ماؤه زرع غيره, that her water, she's pregnant, and doesn't mix with the water of this man that she's marrying in case A. Keep it separate. And this is because of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's quite clear. والامتناع في حق ثابت النسب. In terms of why it's not allowed in this case, which they all agree on, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad don't take this position or this one from Imam Abu Yusuf. They have a slightly different position. And they say لحق صاحب الماء ولا حرمة للزنا. This is because in this one there is a right of the one who had intercourse with her, and there's no hurmah fi zani. How can you have sanctity for the case of zina? Okay, so this is jawab of Imam Abu Yusuf. أن الامتناع في الأصل لحرمة الحمل. They agree, and Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad disagree with that. لا نسلم أن الامتناع لحرمة الحمل بل الامتناع لحق صاحب الماء. This is the right of the one who, if you like, had intercourse with her, the صاحب الماء. ولا حرمة لصاحب الماء وهو الزاني. So this is not, there's no hurma, there's no ihtiram there. Just one small case here that comes afterwards, really short. Imam Marghinani mentions, وإن تزوج حاملا من السبي فالنكاح فاسد لأنه ثابت. Again, you see now that they bring in examples of slaves. So if a person is captured from Darul Harb, a place that's not ruled by Muslims, and they are brought into Darul Islam, so if you think about the land, right, and they're brought as a slave, right, and say that person is brought as a slave girl and she's pregnant, you can't marry her. The nikah is fasid. Okay, again, because she, in this particular case, she has a nasab. Again, they're teasing out the reasons for this, and this would happen if a Muslim was captured and taken over as well, right? وذلك لأن الحمل ثابت النسب. What they're trying to really get into our heads is that when you have ثابت النسب, it prevents marriage with somebody else. Yeah. Even if it's a disbeliever, because obviously she would have been she's a disbeliever, she's come across, she's been taken to Darul Islam, she will still have the rights. So it's showing you that for non-Muslims this would apply in the same way. فلا يجوز تزوجها كما لا يجوز إذا كان حملها ثابت النسب من المسلم. So it's the same for Muslims and for non-Muslims. And we'll talk about this later in the chapter of nikah of the Ahlul Shirk later on, inshallah ta'ala.